Global Edge's Sanction Check webinar. My name is Emily Unterberger with Global Edge, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. I would like to start by thanking you for taking the time out of your day to learn more about sanction checks and what Global Edge sees as a key requirement within the supply chain today. Today's goal will be to provide valuable information to help address gaps commonly found in sanction screening processes. Throughout the presentation, we will provide insight on what organizations should consider when sanction screening, including responsibilities, accountability, and penalties. We will provide examples based on our experiences and knowledge within the industry. We will share recommended techniques to improve procedures and policies within your organization. And finally, we will wrap up with a quick look at the vendor Lynx platform and how we've simplified the process by eliminating time-consuming and recurring processes. Before we begin, let's take a moment to locate the question box on the lower portion of the GoToWebinar panel. We encourage you to ask questions and provide feedback throughout the presentation. We will gather and answer them during a short question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Next, let me welcome today's presenter. Please welcome Lisa LaDou. She is a certified fraud examiner and Global Edge's Director of Risk Management. Lisa works directly with our clients and their vendors to research and identify vendor risk. Lisa has impeccable performance in vendor research and risk discovery. Her experience at Global Edge provides her with insight across all industries and all sizes of companies. Lisa has developed a unique awareness on industry trends to enhance not only Global Edge's solutions, but our clients' internal processes and policies as well. Please welcome Ms. Lisa LaDou as today's presenter. Lisa, welcome, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Emily, for that kind introduction. As a member of Global Edge's team, I am honored and excited to take a few minutes out of my day to share with you the industry and personal knowledge I have gained working with clients and vendors during our vendor onboarding process. Before we get started, let me share with you a little bit about Global Edge. Global Edge started out as an accounts payable recovery audit company back in 2004. While working with our clients, we identified a need to have a deeper understanding of our client suppliers, ensuring that they are a valid business entity and that those suppliers are operating as expected by our clients and are compliant with government regulations. As part of our growth, we became a member of Jacobson Holding. JH has been in business for over 25 years and has more than 20 companies under their umbrella. We have a presence in over 15 states and conduct business in healthcare, government, and commercial arenas. Global Edge is a Native American minority-owned company, and today we focus on developing industry-agnostic software-as-a-service technology. Today we'll talk about sanction checking, what it is, why we need to do it, and how to implement a successful process within your organization. There are many things to consider as we navigate through this presentation. It may seem that sanction screening is yet another thing we have to do for the government. You might ask, why should I sanction screen? For starters, in May 2013, the Office of Inspector General issued a special advisory bulletin providing clarification on the scope of exclusions and the steps you as an organization should take to protect yourself from sanctioned individuals and businesses. This update provided greater clarity for businesses and the actions they need to take when conducting business. The report and the attention it's getting highlights the need for businesses to think about who their vendors are and what risk they may be exposed to by doing business with them. The report created buzz around who, when, and how often organizations should be sanction checking. Is annually enough? Should it be quarterly, monthly, or even daily? As we go throughout this presentation, there's a number of references that point back to this report. We will include a link to the report in our follow-up email after the webinar and have it available as well on our website in the news section. So let's get started on why you should be sanction checking. The reason for sanction checking is to protect businesses and consumers. The screening process protects organizations from businesses not operating within the expectations of the government agencies, including Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General, Office of Foreign Asset Control, the General Services Administration, and the Bureau of Industry and Security, as well as many more. For example, the following statement is taken directly from the USTreasury.gov website. The Office of Foreign Asset Control of the United States Department of Treasury administers and enforces economic and trade sanctions based on U.S. foreign policy and national security goals against targeted foreign countries and regimes, terrorists, international narcotics traffickers, those engaged in activities related to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and other threats to national security, foreign policy, or the economy of the United States. The Office of Inspector General was established in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to identify and eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse in the department's programs and to promote efficiency and economy in departmental operations. The OIG carries out this mission through a nationwide program of audits, inspections, and investigations. In addition to the OIG, has been given the authority to exclude from participation in Medicare, Medicaid, and other federal health care programs individuals and entities who have engaged in fraud or abuse, and to impose civil monetary penalties for certain misconduct related to the federal health care programs. In addition, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of the Inspector General clearly states that organizations cannot employ or do business with sanctioned or excluded individuals or entities. This holds true for other federal sanction lists as well. These lists I've included and mentioned earlier, but these checks mentioned should be done daily for all clients. These excluded entities or individuals are often referred to as LEIE, List of Excluded Individuals, or EPLS, Excluded Parties List. So why do sanction checks? Number one, the government has sanctioned businesses to support you in protecting your business and the government from fraud, waste, and abuse. Number two, well, frankly, the government expects you to. And number three, penalties for doing business with sanctioned suppliers can be very expensive. And remember, there is more than one list to check with regular frequency. Finding an organization to help you facilitate the process will likely be less expensive than doing it yourself internally. So what's the risk if I don't sanction check my suppliers? Most sanctions have a monetary penalty associated with them. A provider can face civil monetary penalties of up to $10,000 per claim submitted to the federal government if the provider knew or should have known the person was excluded. According to the Office of Inspector General, and I quote, an excluded individual or entity that submits a claim for reimbursement to a federal health care program or causes such a claim to be submitted may be subject to a civil monetary penalty of $10,000, and that's for each item or service furnished during the period that the person or entity was excluded. The individual or entity may also be subject to treble damages for the amount claimed for each item or service. In addition, since reinstatement into the programs is not automatic, the excluded individual may jeopardize future reinstatement into federal health care programs. Basically, it can be very expensive to conduct business with a sanctioned supplier. And as an organization, it may jeopardize future ability for your organization to participate in federal health care programs. Another consideration is your reputation. For many organizations, negative publicity can be just as harmful and painful as the civil monetary penalty. Reputation is important to any business. Our recommendation is don't take any chances. Here are some considerations. Concealing or failure to disclose you are doing business with a sanctioned supplier, once you discover it, can be considered fraudulent behavior and be subject to criminal and also civil penalties. You are responsible for making sure you are not employing an individual or entity on a sanction list. There can be fines for conducting business with a sanctioned supplier. There may also be criminal charges based on the severity of the violation. For healthcare organizations specifically, there's risk of not being allowed to operate with federal healthcare programs. By having strong controls in place, your penalties can be greatly reduced if you have a good sanction check process and you can provide proof of documentation around the process, including the procedures your team leverages to ensure all suppliers and business owners are sanction checked. As you develop your sanction check process, remember there are outside factors to consider. Companies like yourself may receive sanction fines because of the actions of your customers and what those customers do with the product you sold them. Your company may also receive a sanction fine due to the supplier you purchased from or to the organization you sell to. The company policies and procedures around these issues could be your best defense in the event of a fine. Your sanction check process should define the expectations of your suppliers and customers, which we will cover further on in the webinar. As we go through the process of discussing the development of a sanction process, think about what your organization's exposure is from the customer, the suppliers, and your employees. These examples show businesses that were sanctioned because they did not disclose they were transacting with a sanctioned country, they sold their products to a company who was conducting business with a sanctioned country, or they identified that they were doing business with a sanctioned company and they reported it, but they were still fined because they should have checked before contracting or using the supplier. The OFAC publishes a list of organizations sanctioned, which includes a detailed report of the sanction. By reviewing these sanctions, one can quickly see it is not just the healthcare industry. It is our recommendation that everyone conduct sanction checks. As we prepared to conduct this webinar, we have spoken with a number of organizations in many industries. We wanted to understand what's included in their sanction check process today. We received a wide variety of responses from organizations that believe their business does not need to conduct a sanction screening because they aren't in the healthcare industry, or they'll check the sam.gov list upon onboarding a new supplier and call it good. We've spoken with some that have implemented monthly sanction process, which we would consider the bare minimum. In the Health and Human Services report that we referred to, it is recommended to check sam.gov, but also check the OIG separately, as sam.gov does not have all of the detail of the OIG list. And sam.gov is updated only monthly, leaving a gap. We conducted some internal evaluations to ensure we were conducting the most comprehensive checks for our clients. We found a number of items on the OIG list which were not on the sam.gov. Given our analysis, it is our recommendation that your sanction check process go beyond just checking the sam.gov. Let's take a moment and let us understand when you sanction check your vendors by responding in the survey question displaying.
Lisa, it looks like we have a tie between quarterly and daily with 29% of the folks that are running sanction checks. And 21% do it on an annual basis and 21% do it on a monthly basis.
Okay, thank you, Emily. So one of the, anchoring back to this question, looking at your organization, do you feel like you have the right controls in place? Do you really know who your suppliers are? It's really important for your organization to take the time necessary to determine if you are doing your due diligence. Consider the time and resources currently being dedicated to sanction checking and what is required to properly screen and verify the results to minimize risk. The resources required to implement and maintain the sanction screening controls may seem overwhelming, but they are necessary to ensure you have the right controls in place. Remember, it's not just healthcare organizations that need to be aware. We all do. In our conversations with our clients and potential clients, we find all the time the data gathering process is overwhelming when you lack an effective operational or technical plan to manage the vendor data and the results from the sanction check. Is it safe to assume that most of you have or currently manage the data and results through spreadsheets? Take a moment and let us know how you sanction check today by responding to the survey question.
The result of that poll, the 29% of you have internal teams perform screening and manage the results. 24% of you have third parties screen your vendor data and internally review the results. 18% of you do not currently have a process, and 29% of you are unsure of what that process is.
Thank you, Emily. It sounds like some of you are like most supply chain professionals that we meet. You're not 100% confident that the vendor information you should be checking is being checked. The information, such as the owner or guarantor's names, all the names associated with the supplier organization, should be checked through the screening process. We recommend you examine how your organization manages the cost associated relative to the time required to gather data, run the checks, and verify the results. Do you or your organization have the mindset that my risk is so minimal it's not worth the cost to run sanction checks on my suppliers? Or have we decided to check only if it's a high-spend vendor, government contracting, or some other high-risk criteria that puts your supplier in a high-risk bucket? We check some organizations will say we check suppliers when they're added, but never check again. These scenarios leave potential areas of risk and can be very costly to you. If the vendors in the vendor master file get checked, how do you know that they've all been checked? Checking quarterly or monthly can be very labor intensive because it includes downloading your vendor master file time and time again, trying to filter the results to ensure you only have the new results and you're not double working a record. Just the painstaking process of managing the results can take a full-time employee's resources to process and manage. To simplify things, Global Edge recommends having a tool that allows you to load your vendor once, process and review the results once, then work the vendor again only when a new potential sanction hit is received. We recommend having a standard location to store the diligence history and the documentation related to your staff's work, all within a single location or a single platform. Now let's take a look at developing a strong sanction check process and how you lead your organization through the process, relieving the time and cost currently associated with sanction checking. As you know, your organization is responsible to protect itself against these sanctioned entities or individuals. There are a few questions you should answer when considering sanction screening and implementing it into your standard operating procedure if you don't already. First, who within your organization is responsible for your suppliers? At the end of the day, the government may hold somebody within your organization responsible for not taking the necessary action to prevent conducting business with a sanctioned entity. Who's that person? Generally, this is a senior leader who has formal responsibility over your supply chain. That individual should be asking what the process is and how the organization is protected. If you don't know the answer, you should ask your leadership. Do you really have the tools required to know your suppliers? If the Office of Inspector General, either state or federally, stopped by your office today and asked to see your sanction process, how would you respond? What documentation do you have in place? Take the time to document your supplier onboarding process. Create a standard operating procedure for your organization to follow. It should include answering the following questions. What is your vendor screening process? Not just as it relates to sanctions, but full onboarding and authentication of new suppliers. How do you confirm your suppliers are cleared from possible sanction matches if there was a fuzzy hit? How often are you screening your entities for sanctions? And then where is the documentation stored, including the last date the vendors were sanction checked, total number of suppliers that were checked, total number of vendors with possible matches, total suppliers inactivated due to confirmed matches. And consider documenting your accounts payable spend tied to these suppliers. That'll help you understand what your exposure is, because some fines are levied based on how much money you paid to that vendor. The difficulty for many organizations is to acquire all the information associated with sanction checking quickly and without pulling resources and staff away from other important tasks. The value of having controls and guidelines around your internal process means that at any time you know what the process is and you know where to find the information you need. And even more importantly, you know which vendors may be putting your organization at risk. Now that you've considered what you should do, you need to answer the question, what entities and individuals do I need to sanction check? The U.S. government states every person and company within the borders of the United States is responsible to conduct sanction checks. Even if the organization is headquartered or has a branch elsewhere, or someone is just visiting the United States, or a U.S. resident located abroad, the U.S. government expects you to not do business with sanctioned or excluded persons or entities. So let's take a moment to let us know if you have a standard operating procedure for sanction checks by responding to the survey question displaying.
The result of the poll is that 40% of you said that you do have a standard operating procedure in place. 30% said at this time you do not. And 30% of you are unsure if you have a standard operating procedure.
Thank you, Emily. And if you have a third-party vendor that helps you with your sanction check process, they probably can help you develop the standard operating procedure. Your standard operating procedure should reflect the importance of this responsibility that the U.S. government mandates to every person and company. Your standards should apply to all of your departments. Your procedure needs to be clearly defined and understood by everyone involved with onboarding new suppliers. This typically includes accounts payable, capital equipment purchasing teams, vendor master file management teams, and any supply chain role that contracts with suppliers or individuals. The process should include the ability to access results in one comprehensive location. Within the report, you should be able to track which suppliers had possible hits and what action was taken by your organization as it relates to that supplier. You will need to determine within your standard operating procedure what forms will be required when there is a potential match. Keep in mind, depending on which list the hit is on, the action could be very different. The standard operating procedure should have a documented reporting process with contact names and numbers, not only contacts within your organization, such as legal personnel, but also contact names should you need to reach out to a governing body like OIG or OFAC. State where your results, research, and other documents are stored and how to access them. The procedures, the standard operating procedures, should be regularly maintained, especially if there's turnover or new processes that are implemented. So you might ask, what about my suppliers? I sanction check them, but I can't be sure they're not doing business with a sanctioned entity or individual. You're right. However, there are a couple things you can do to be sure they understand the efforts you are taking and the efforts you expect your suppliers to take. First, communication. Incorporate clear guidelines stating you will conduct sanction checks and expect your suppliers are doing the same. These guidelines may be on your website, included in your vendor onboarding process, or they might be made part of your supplier contract. Take a moment and let us know if you require vendors to provide you proof they are conducting sanction checks by responding to the survey question.
The results show that 63% of you currently do not require your vendors to conduct sanction checks, 31% of you are unsure, and 6% of you do.
Thank you, Emily. So our recommendation would be that you should consider asking for proof that they run sanction screening against the exclusion list. Also, your contract that you have with your vendors should contain warranties that the supplier will not do business with excluded individuals or entities. Your contract should also have an indemnification provision within that contract, mandating that your supplier indemnify you if you are subject to fines or other penalties because your supplier was excluded or they used an excluded individual to provide you services. Clarify that you do not do business with sanctioned entities and clearly state that you perform routine sanction checks. Include contract language that can dictate that the vendor agreements may be terminated if the vendor becomes excluded, or that the vendor agreements will not be renewed if the vendor does not establish a sanction screening program. Wow, we've covered a lot so far, and there's a lot to consider. Now, where do you start? We've talked about standard operating procedures. Get those set and then find an organization to help you with your sanction check process. Global Edge does that, and I'd like to take a few moments before we get into questions to share with you our process. Global Edge recognized the need for a solution that centrally managed vendors with a simplified sanction check process to ease the workload of our customers. As we began researching the requirements and taking valuable insight from our own clients, we were able to provide a solution that streamlines the process, documents the results and actions, provides a simple interface that centrally manages all vendor aspects of vendor management. We recognized that every client is unique and they have distinctive internal procedures with possible sanction hits. The tool is designed to allow you to work results based on your policies and procedures. Your team will have built-in work queues through the web portal where you will be able to address possible sanction matches and determine what is required next. The Office of Inspector General and most other sanctioning bodies recommends that while a company can use a third party to scrub their vendors, the actual decision made around the results and liability rests with the company, not the third party. Global Edge made it easy for our clients to work the suppliers and to ensure that the work is done only once. The platform allows our clients to make notes about the activity and thought process, attach emails or documents obtained during the research of a possible match, and when all is said and done, our clients can code the vendor to either confirmed hit or false positive or no hit. The one-time management of results means you won't have to rework vendors each time a sanction check is run. Should a new potential sanction hit result from our daily sanction check process, you will receive an email notification, as well as the system will automatically put that vendor into a status requiring your attention. In our Vendor Lynx platform, there are 3 different options to add a supplier. The first is a batch transfer through a secure FTP site. This is how we load the initial data you would provide. Take a moment and let us know how many suppliers you add per month to your vendor master file by responding to the survey question.
The results show that 40% of you add 100 to 500 each month, with 35% of you adding 0 to 50 each month, 10% in the 50 to 100 range, and 10% in the 50 to 1,000 range, and 5% add 1,000 or more.
Great, Emily. That's helpful in understanding how to explain our next 2 steps of adding vendors into our platform. As I mentioned, the first way we add, which is your large original vendor master file, is through a secure FTP site. The majority of you have more than 5 or 10 vendors a month that you add. So Global Edge, when we developed our platform, we allow for adding one-off vendors through the Vendor Lynx platform. You just type it in. But if you have more than a few vendors, like most of you do, the new suppliers each month can be added the same way you did the original data set, through a secure FTP process. We understand that deduping this list of suppliers can be time-consuming and may be difficult to determine which vendors you've sanction checked and which ones are new. Global Edge will actually do the dedupe for you. We'll take the vendor master file each month as you send it to us and only add the new vendors or suppliers into the system. Once in the system, they're run through the sanction check process and are continuously monitored on a daily basis. The benefit with Vendor Lynx is that you only have to add a supplier once. Once the vendor is in, you are complete. The time is minimal since you won't rework the hit each and every time, which you might be doing with your current process. Let's take a moment and put this into perspective. Let's say you send 30,000 vendors through the system at one time. It is very likely you will have a good number of false positives that need to be dispositioned. This workload is no different than what your team is probably doing every year, quarter, or month right now. The difference is, once you do the work, the vendor is coded to resolved, and you don't have to look at the same vendor month after month. The piece I'm talking about might seem insignificant if you've never had to look at 300 false positives, and then 3 months later had to work the same 300 false positives plus 40 new ones. Our system is designed that once the first round is worked, the next round is only the new ones, greatly reducing the time and effort needed to have a good sanction check process for your organization. As you build out your standard operating procedure, Global Edge will support you in building it with recommendations based on experience. Here we've outlined a very basic possible workflow. If you have a possible hit, you may require additional internal research, updating vendor links, capturing your steps along the way. If you request an attestation, or sometimes called an affidavit, the result of that document may or may not clear your concern, whereby you have a business decision to make. Do you continue operating with this vendor or search for another vendor with a lower perceived liability? At the point where you're not able to confirm or clear a vendor, we recommend consulting your internal legal team, and at times you may need to reach out to the reporting agency, such as the OFAC or OIG, for final confirmation on that vendor. The valuable thing about vendor links is it does capture and retain the vendor profile information for your reference. We show you what data was sent in the sanction process and what data was returned. So when you are comparing the results received, you can easily rule out false positives or determine if further action is needed. In addition, the notes, comments, and any PDF versions of required documents are all located in one platform, making it easy to follow up on pending work. In addition to providing you a tool that allows easy facilitation of the sanction checking, the Vendor Links platform provides you the ability to quickly export a report of the sanction check results, including the last day the supplier was sanction checked. Remember that we check suppliers against over 50+ sanction lists daily and reflect the last date of the sanction check was conducted on every vendor. We also have a dashboard and drill-down reporting for details on sanction check results. This allows you a quick snapshot of your vendor master file and may be useful for your C-suite executives. So in conclusion, every U.S. citizen and business has a responsibility to sanction check. There are penalties for doing business with a sanctioned person or entity. It is important to document your sanction check process and make your employees aware of that process. Continuous daily checks are your safest option to avoid doing business with a sanctioned person or entity. Daily checks do not have to be costly and should reduce costs over time. Vendor Links is designed to be easy and a cost-effective solution. That concludes our presentation on Global Edge's sanction screening, recommendations, and processes. Now, I presume you've been sending through questions and comments throughout the webinar that I'm excited to get to. Before I do, just a quick note. If you are interested in seeing a more detailed demonstration of our Vendor Links platform and how Global Edge can help your organization facilitate the implementation of a streamlined and comprehensive sanction screening process, we'll send out a brief follow-up email providing a link to request a demonstration of the platform, and we'll reach out to you from there. And if you have questions around pricing, we can discuss that when we meet as well. Emily, have there been questions that have come across?
Lisa, we do have some questions that have come across. The first question is, what if we don't have the resources to extract only new vendors to add to the platform?
So, as I mentioned, when we obtain your data, we're getting it in a batch file. You can send that batch to be just your new vendors each month, or you can just send us the whole vendor master file again, and our team will dedupe it for you. And that we developed it that way because our clients, some of them don't want to exert the time and resources to dedupe. So Global Edge is willing to do that for you.
Thanks, Lisa. The next question is, what if a business or a person is added to the sanction list after the sanction check ran?
For Global Edge's process, when the vendor is cleared on the initial run, they show as no hit. If something changes, that person or business is added to a sanction list, there's two methods of communication back to our clients. One is an email that is generated to let you know that there's been a change and the vendor is on a list, and it includes information about what list. The second is the system automatically flips the status of that vendor from a no-hit status to an actionable item that lets you know this vendor needs to be worked.
Thanks, Lisa. The next question is, will you help me decide what to do with a sanctioned hit?
So the OIG reports that, the report that we talked about says that liability ultimately rests with the client. The third-party vendor can be used to conduct the sanction check and run the screening, but the decision and disposition of the vendor is ultimately up to the client. But what Global Edge does is we help you create a standard operating procedure that then defines, if this happens, what are my steps? So while we don't actually action the vendor for you and make a decision, we help you create that standard operating procedure so that everybody within your organization understands clearly, if we have a possible hit, first name, last name, the city and state, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to request documents. We're going to reach out to legal. So Global Edge doesn't tell you what to do, but we give you the best practices to help you make a decision.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. The next question is, you mentioned you do AP auditing. Is Sanction Checks part of that?
So Global Edge started out as an AP audit recovery firm looking at lost revenue in the accounts payable. And so when Vendor Lynx was developed, it was because some of our clients were asking us to do more with the same data they were already giving us for the AP audit. And that data, what they were looking for is, help me understand my vendors. And part of that understanding is sanction checking. But what was also developed with Vendor Lynx is IRS, TIN matching, understanding who your vendor is from, does the business name match the IRS TIN? And then the sanction check was one more element, and that's the basic or the first step of Vendor Lynx. Global Edge also then does document gathering such as W-9s, minority certificates, and nonprofit certificates to help you with your Tier 2 reporting. And then we have higher levels of vendor vetting or vendor authentication that include scrubbing your vendors for fraud risk and financial risk. Maybe they're critical to your operation, and if they have a bankruptcy and their assets are seized, it's going to interrupt your operation. So the Vendor Lynx platform is module, and Sanction Check is just one of the modules. The other items that Global Edge offers outside the Vendor Lynx platform is our Encompass or corporate card auditing tool. As you look at fraud risk and compliance risk of your vendors, there's also risk from the spending aspect of your employees. And so we have a tool called Encompass that audits your P cards and travel cards based on your company policy and procedure. Again, back to that standard operating procedure for card usage. So we have multiple tools beyond just the sanction check and recovery auditing.
The next question, Lisa, is, can I send an automated batch file of new vendors, or do I have to just send them monthly?
You could send an automated batch file if you wanted to send them. Our system is designed to receive your data, and if it's in a certain format, then it can receive either automatically or once a month, however often you want to send it. The other thing is, again, I mentioned you can also enter a vendor one-off through the Vendor Lynx platform without even sending the batch.
Next question is, how would I know if all my vendors have been sanction checked?
So with our sanction check procedures, there is a report that you can export of all of your vendors. It's a comprehensive report. And along with the vendor, it's going to show you what came back, what the status was. Was it a no-hit, or was there a possible hit, and what level, meaning how much of a match was that hit? So with your vendor report that you can export, it's in Excel, you would see a blank where there's no sanction check done if the vendor wasn't sanction checked. So that's one way. The other way is logging into the platform. When you view the vendor, there's a dashboard in our platform that on that dashboard, you're going to see a radial or a circle icon. And that icon lets you know that a sanction check was done, but it's also color-coded that immediately trains your eye to what is the result of that sanction check. So if there was no hit, it's blue. If it's been cleared, it's green. If there's a possible fuzzy hit, it's going to be yellow, or if it is a higher level confirmed hit, it might be red. So you have that one-off as well as the comprehensive reporting to identify all of your vendors have been sanction checked.
Great, thanks, Lisa. The next question is this applicable to providers and individuals as well as vendors?
So when we have our client's vendor master file, oftentimes they have sole proprietors, sometimes called UIV, unincorporated individuals. So when a vendor master file contains people, whatever's in your vendor master file is going to go through our sanction check process. You may have employees in your vendor master file that you pay separately as a contractor in addition to being an employee. So if it's in your vendor master file, it's going to be incorporated into our sanction check process.
Thanks, Lisa. That wraps up the Q&A session. I want to thank everyone for their time today and joining the webinar on sanction checks. You will receive a follow-up email with the link to the report